things were different in the 1980s. America was being run by an incompetent actor, and Britain was in the icy grip of a female dictator. I guess some things don't change that much after all, but we did have a positivity, a forward-thinking nature to Britain at the time. Even in the grips of yuppiedom and Thatcherism, we seemed to still have a good impression of ourselves. So good was this impression that Alan Moore had to imagine Britain being spared in the wake of a nuclear holocaust around the world in order for it to fall to xenophobia, isolationism, and fascism. As it turns out, he may have been a little bit too positive and optimistic. But much like small dogs have never really reconciled themselves to the fact that they are not gigantic timber wolves, Britain has never really adjusted itself to the fact that it is not an imperial power anymore. Post-World War II, we lost our empire in a better manner than many other countries managed to lose theirs. It must be said, we handled the collapse in a much better and more humane way than many others. Not that that is saying much, and I am in no way excusing the excesses and horrors that the empire inflicted on people. But despite living in this bombed out state, in spite of living in craters and shattered buildings, in spite of still being on the ration for decades after the war, despite all of this, we still saw ourselves as this great world-spanning and striding imperial power, and it took an enormous crisis for us to understand our new and diminished place in the world, and that disaster was the Suez Crisis. In 1956, Israel, Great Britain and France all invaded Egypt together in an attempt to wrest back control of the Suez Canal and to remove the Egyptian premier from power. They were forced to withdraw under immense political pressure from the United States, the USSR and the United Nations. Britain was no longer an individual great power capable of projecting its force around the world as it once did.
It was humbled.
It was humiliated.
So was France. And this is seen as the end of Britain as an imperial, independent, great power, and really the dawn of the era of the two superpowers. That was it. We were done as a global military and political force. We were fucked. After this crisis of confidence, we were able to rebuild ourselves, most especially during the 1980s, as an economic and banking power. Here we found our prestige again. We also found a talent for diplomacy that we seem to have since lost. This made us still important players on the global stage, with our legacy from World War II, in military technology at least, and our technical innovations, our banking innovations, our financial sector, and our diplomacy. We were diminished, but we were still important. Now, that seems to be changing again. The world has changed. The world has begun to consolidate into power blocks. The Pacific Rim nations are becoming closer through various trade ties and so forth. The South American nations are tying themselves together similarly in various ways. America has made many trade deals, for all Donald Trump is threatening to walk back on them, that have made it a stronger power and have tied it together with others. Trade seems to be the new way that most nations avoid war, which is why it's only rogue nations that are outside of these blocks, outside of the global community, like North Korea, that really threaten that stability anymore. Why would you want to kill your customers? Why would you want to kill your suppliers? It doesn't make a huge amount of sense in the context in which we now find ourselves. But Britain still thinks of itself as this independent, massive economic power, which it simply isn't anymore, any more than it is still the imperial power that was brought low by Suez. We are no longer wolves, either militarily or economically or diplomatically. We are now chihuahuas in every sense, a small yappy type dog, but we could join a pack like the European Union, and where one dog alone may fail, many dogs can succeed. And we did. We became an important part of the European Union. We instilled some of our virtues and values into them. We put the brakes, or the kibosh, on some of the more extreme ideas percolating through the European Union, until recently. Now, still bemused and deluded by the thought that we are still some economic wolf, we have stepped willingly into the trap of Brexit. And just as with Suez, we're fucked. And I happen to think that Brexit is going to go down in the history books as Suez 2.0. This is where it's brought home to us that the world has again changed, that we can no longer continue in that old way that we used to. Things are different now, we cannot run alone, and we're losing everything that made us an important and powerful player by virtue of doing this. The banks are fleeing to the continent. Many companies have been quietly laying people off. Foreigners who settled here from the EU are feeling under siege, and many of them are leaving. And these are some of the best and brightest and hardest working people there are. We're losing our opportunities to study and travel abroad with ease. People who do not earn as much money as perhaps some of the most important or most powerful are losing their ability to travel. But this has a knock-on effect on creativity, on design, on the things that we are still good at, like writing and film production and music. The inability to access the world with the same facility that we had as part of the EU will have a massive negative impact on all of these aspects. We are screwing ourselves, and nobody seems to have the leadership, the understanding to step forward and handle this, to lead, to inform, to point out that this is destructive, that this is not something that we should do. The government has abdicated its responsibility thanks to populism. Leaders are squabbling over the scraps. Who will be in charge of the ruin that is left in its wake? We need to adjust to this new reality. And yet nobody is willing to do it. It took Suez as a crisis for us to accept and understand that we were not that mighty imperial bulldog that we once were. Perhaps we will have to go through Brexit to understand that we are not the important world player on the economic, political or diplomatic stage that we now think that we are. We are deluded on these issues. It's a shame that we may have to go through it, but hopefully the same kind of leadership that relatively peacefully deconstructed the empire post-Suez, hopefully someone responsible, someone capable, will step forward to manage the disaster post-Brexit. Or maybe we can still hope we can avoid the whole thing. But people are deluding themselves if they think that this is going to be a positive. Business is suffering, the pound is relatively worthless. The damage has only just started. And the lower pound was supposed to boost our trade, it was supposed to make our goods more interesting to people elsewhere, more affordable. But it hasn't. And there's no leadership. No leadership at all. We are mightily screwed, and we may end up much less than a chihuahua. We may well end up the hamster of Europe. Zang. Grim gave a big yawn and settled down to sleep. And of course, when Grim goes to sleep, all of his friends go to sleep too. The people on the internet were just text on a screen, the collectibles were just cheap plastic tat, and the books were just elaborate sandwiches made of wood and paper. Even Grim himself, once he was asleep, was just an old saggy goth twat, baggy and a bit loose at the seams, and nobody loved him.